Good morning, Sarah. How are you?
I am good, Harley. We're recording this the weekend after inauguration weekend, which was crazy.
It was a slog.
Yeah, I ended up going to 3 balls. It was really cold last weekend.
Yeah.
So, of course, all the streets are shut down. So there was a lot of walking in the cold involved in heels and dresses. But it was a blast. It was a blast of a weekend, but I'm still a little tired.
Yeah, I imagine so. And it's still really, really cold outside.
Yeah, still really cold.
I freeze my butt off walking into your house this morning. So cold. Although, I think it's supposed to be like 50 degrees on Wednesday. That's what Forrest was telling me.
Fascinating.
He better not be lying, because like my whole mental health is riding on the fact that it's going to be 50 degrees on Wednesday.
Truly. And when is Groundhog Day? When is Punxsutawney Phil coming out to let us know?
I think it's like February 9th or something like that.
Okay, so what's coming up?
Yeah, it's February.
I was getting the movie Groundhog Day when I search. Actual date. February 2nd, actually.
Oh, sweet.
So it's really coming up.
It's really soon.
That's like, what, next weekend from when we're recording? Oh my gosh. It's Punxsutawney. It's time, baby.
Please. Oh, my least favorite month is coming up, which is the month of March.
Why do you hate the month of March?
Because it's kind of the worst of everything. It's 31 days. There's no holidays that I can think of that you get time off for in March.
True, but have you ever heard of a holiday called St. Patrick's Day?
That's true. But you don't get time off for it.
No, you don't get time off for it.
And then on top of that, it's like you still get bad weather, but it's like the tease of spring. So I really hated March when I was in school because I guess spring break was in like April or something. And so there were literally just no days off in March, and it just felt like the longest month.
I never thought of that. I just kind of think that February is usually my least favorite because it's just so cold usually. At least March, it's usually not as absolutely frigid.
I'm a big freak for Valentine's Day. I love Valentine's Day.
You guys have any plans yet?
Not yet, but they're starting to come together. I'm torn between wanting to do like a fancy meal at home and wanting to go out to a nice restaurant. We've been really enjoying like getting a bottle of wine, making a nice meal, having a dessert. And so I don't know if we're going to do like an indoor or in our house Valentine's or go out.
My good friend Mary Collins, shout out to her. She recommended Capo DC, which has this like, I'm going to say it wrong. Wagyu?
Oh, Wagyu.
Wagyu.
I think.
I don't know. I said it wrong, and then Carrie, my fiance, corrected me. And now I'm like paranoid. I'm saying it wrong every time.
I say Wagyu. So
let me get some of that Wagyu. That's the Georgia coming out in here. But they're doing like a tasting, or they do a tasting menu. So that's what we're gonna do for Valentine's, which is cool. And I'm very intrigued about how that's gonna go.
That sounds fun. Yeah, you have to tell me about that.
Yeah.
And if it's good, I'll have to go too.
Exactly.
So let me know. All right. So now that the banter part of the episode's over, welcome to part 2 of the Hanafi massacre, the Hanafi siege, Marion Barry, and of all things, and pizza.
I keep forgetting that cameo. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's a fun one for sure. So without further ado, let's pick up where we left off on March 10th, 1977. She's Sarah.
She's Harley, and we're gaveling in another session of Crime in Congress.
When we last spoke, the Hanafi siege had been going on for more than 30 hours, having begun on the morning of March 9th. Before we jump back into the action, though, I want to make one correction and one addition to episode 1. First up is a correction. Although he was shot at close range in the head, the security guard at the district building, Cantrell, actually survived.
Oh.
Yeah. I can't think of another true crime story where the victim was shot in the head at close range and survives the attack.
Yeah, that's crazy. Good for him.
Yeah, so go Cantrell. And then I also neglected to mention that there was another near death at the district building that day. A man named Robert Pierce was shot in the back, and it severed his spinal cord.
Ow.
Yeah. He was completely paralyzed after this.
Oh, that's really sad.
Mm-hmm. Police and everyone else involved in this case, including the FBI and news reporters, set up shop at the mayor's command center on the 5th floor of the Municipal Center, which is not the district building. This is located on 14th Street, attached to the USPS Center and across from the DC Comedy Clubhouse. The space was designated for events like this and was decked out with every surveillance gadget the district could get their hands on. Heading into day 2, talks were at a stalemate. Police had met all of Calip's realistic demands. If you'll remember, he wanted the movie premiere stopped, which it was.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted 700...
What was the movie again?
It was the movie, it was called The Messenger. It was about Allah and, like, his story.
Yes, okay, got it. And he was like, that's...
blasphemous.
To even have a depiction of Allah in the movie? Okay, yeah, got it.
He wanted $750 delivered to him, which was the equivalent of about $3,900 today, which was given to him, so he got that. But Caliph wasn't quite ready to give up the act.
Well, also, didn't he want the killers of his family delivered to him as well?
Yes, but even Caliph knew that that was a delusional ask. That was just not possible. It was clear that Caliph had a different underlying motivation for his crimes, but police weren't yet sure what exactly that was. In an attempt to continue flexing his power over the police, Caliph demanded coffee and donuts for the hostages. At least they were getting some food, though coffee and sugar on an empty stomach would be rough.
I know. Well, also, I'm thinking, like, my anxiety is already pretty high if I'm in a hostage situation. Last thing I need is some caffeine.
Yeah.
Could have a heart attack.
Exactly. And he wanted Muhammad Ali and Wallace Muhammad, who were 2 prominent Muslims, to surrender to him. He was cunning and made this announcement during the evening news. Caliph did 100 interviews. 100 interviews in a single day during the crisis. So it immediately made national headlines.
Mm-hmm.
The headlines made it all the way to Wallace himself, who got his butt on a plane and headed to Washington, D.C.
Incredible.
Muhammad Ali, understandably, declined to intervene.
He's like, actually, I think I'll sit this one out.
Yeah, pretty much. At 5 p.m. on March 10th, Caliph was alerted to Wallace's arrival in the district. He hopped on the phone with police, asking why a meeting hadn't yet been arranged. Wallace was ready to, quote, sacrifice his life for America. But that meeting wouldn't ever take place. That's because, around the same time, another, more serious request came from Caliph. Present at the command center and assisting in the hostage negotiations, remember, this is an international diplomacy crisis now, were the ambassadors of Pakistan, Egypt, and Iran. President Carter, R.I.P. by the way.
I know, so sad.
I saw him lying in state, which is really cool.
Great Georgian.
Mm-hmm. He does have some questionable decision making in this episode, so bad timing, but
I'm just gonna stay silent. Love Mr. Carter.
Yes. He had made Middle East policy an anchor of his presidency and was negotiating what would eventually become the Camp David Accords. Anyway, these 3 men were talking to Caliph mostly about his interpretation of Islam and Allah when a request came through. Caliph wanted to meet with the 3 ambassadors face to face inside B'nai B'rith, where he was holding hostages. That was the first place that was taken over.
Right, because that is it a synagogue?
It's not a synagogue, but it's a Jewish center.
Okay, got it, yeah.
After this demand was made, the mood in the command center shifted. Were they actually going to do this? Would the countries of Iran, Pakistan, and Egypt be willing to put lives on the line to address a hostage crisis in the United States?
Right.
And what if this went wrong? It could derail the progress Carter was making towards a peace deal in the Middle East, if not turn into something even worse. The decision as to whether the men would give up control and meet Caliph on his turf felt too big for DC police to make alone. So they called in the big guns, Jimmy Carter.
All right.
He was on his way to a high-ranking dinner and had only a couple of minutes to decide what the right course of action was. After hearing both sides, weighing the risks and benefits, he came up with a decision that I think is very reminiscent of the Carter presidency in general. He would leave it up to the DC police.
Okay.
The federal government was not going to get involved. Can you imagine being left alone to make this decision?
No. I'd be like, what?
Insane.
Come on, Commander-in-Chief.
Right? Luckily, though, the DC police knew what needed to be done. After getting the green light from the leaders of each country, Iran, Pakistan, and Egypt.
I'm surprised they got that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how high up they went. They went to, like, someone in leadership. But they had to be high up enough to give the green light that, we are okay with y'all taking this risk on behalf of our country. And negotiating the terms of the meeting with Caliph, the crew ready to meet their nemesis at the peace table. The terms of the negotiation were as follows. Officer Cullinane would bring the ambassadors to B'nai B'rith. O'Brien, one of the officers, would pick up Aziz, Caliph's son-in-law, who Caliph wanted in attendance for some reason. Negotiations would take place at a table that was set up in the lobby at B'nai B'rith. No one would be permitted weapons, except for the knife that Caliph insisted he keep on him, as he always did. And the police perimeter was pushed back a block to help show some goodwill and build trust with Caliph. No snipers, no hidden weapons, just 7 men meeting at a table to chat.
My gut says this is going to go poorly.
At 8:11 p.m., 34 hours into the hostage crisis, that's exactly what happened. The men met. Before this meeting, Caliph had made a call to his fellow hostage takers, giving them this code phrase that would instruct them to begin shooting hostages should talks go south. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. With that, the talks commenced. Present at this meeting were Caliph, our ringleader, Aziz, his son-in-law, O'Brien and Rob, 2 DC police officers, and Zahedi, Khan, and Gorbal, the 3 ambassadors. You'd expect this meeting to be very tense, and at times it was. However, I was shocked to learn that it actually began with the men embracing one another in a hug.
Interesting.
Negotiations went on for 3 hours, with topics ranging from anti-Semitism to forgiveness to the intricacies of the Islamic faith. It was during this meandering conversation that police would finally understand exactly what motivated Caliph to commit this act of terrorism. Zahedi, one of the ambassadors, must have made the connection first. Quoting from American Caliph, he, as the political figurehead of the Islamic Center of Washington, Zahedi apologized, physically lowering himself before Caliph as he spoke. Zahedi not only apologized for their inability to stop the film from being made and shown, but he also expressed, for the first time, their deep sorrow for what happened to Caliph's family 4 years earlier. All 3 men had arrived in Washington within a few months of the massacre at Caliph's home, and none of them had spoken with him about it. The diplomats, Zahedi said, thought it was not their place to involve themselves in a murder investigation, but they were wrong. Hearing the mention of his family instantly made Caliph break down into tears. It was the first time anyone had seen him weep freely about this, even his closest family members.
Wow.
Caliph wasn't doing this to stop a film from airing. He wasn't doing this to meet Muhammad Ali or Wallace Muhammad or to make $750. He wasn't even really doing this to exact revenge on the men who killed his family. He was doing this because he wanted an apology, and when he got one, it was almost too much for him to bear. I want to chat about this for a minute.
Okay.
Because this whole interaction kind of gets to the heart of crime in Congress. Because these political figures thought it wasn't their place to be involved in a murder investigation. And a hostage crisis came about because of it. I'm not blaming them. There was no way they could have known this would happen.
Yeah.
But it kind of shows why it's important that politicians be involved in a little bit of crime.
Yeah, right? I think it is really interesting that at the end of the day, really what he wanted was an apology. And I do think that's very important too. Like when you ever go see heads of state meet with like victims of crimes and, show, heartfelt compassion and empathy and stuff, I do think that makes a huge difference.
It goes a really long way, and people see their political leaders as leaders. And they want them to recognize their suffering, even if it's not their fault.
Yeah, exactly. Well, with all presidencies too, right? The buck stops here, right? So even if it's not necessarily your fault, showing that, hey, I'm really sorry this happened to you in the country that I'm leading, right? I think, that always goes a long way, as you said.
So I think that if there are any politicians listening to this, first of all, hey, thank you.
Yeah.
But second of all, this is why, in part, there are a lot of reasons why we started Crime in Congress, but this is a part of it, which is that there's a bit of a disconnect between crime that occurs in people's communities and the political leaders who represent them. And so, bringing them together, I think, to help uplift victims, to bring attention to stories, to praise the brave police officers, to apologize, goes a really long way.
Absolutely.
All right, so back to the story. As talks wore on, the ambassadors would read some carefully selected passages from the Quran in the hopes of helping Caliph realize that he was not enacting Allah's will and was, in fact, violating his faith with this whole hostage situation.
Uh-oh.
The last passage read goes like this: He forgives whom he wills, and he punishes whom he wills. And to Allah belongs the dominion of the heavens and the earth and whatever is between them, and to him is the final destination. After reading this verse, the men finally made their opening bid to Caliph. As a show of good faith, they requested that he release 30 hostages being held at B'nai B'rith. The words that came out of Caliph's mouth next stunned everyone at the table. He sat calmly for a minute, mulling over the request, then responded with a question of his own. Why don't I release all of them?
Great idea.
Right?
You said it, not me.
No one said a word. Everyone
Wow.
was just kind of stunned at the table.
Absolutely.
The crew basically ended negotiations there a little bit before midnight. They're like, okay, we're going to take the win where we can get it.
Right, exactly.
And cut this off. The men involved, at least from the government and the police force, were not the ultimate decision makers. And so everyone left the peace table wanting the crisis to end, even Caliph. But the actual plan for how all of this would end still needed to be determined. They needed to get the judge involved. That would be taking over the case, make sure he would approve a plea deal,
Okay.
etc.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So Caliph was the first one to show his cards. In exchange for releasing all of the hostages, he wanted total immunity for him and his men involved in the hostage crisis at all 3 locations.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough lift.
Yeah, that obviously was not going to happen. Someone died. No one was getting off the hook that easily. But police had to tread carefully with that argument because the whole reason Caliph did this was because he didn't have justice for his murdered family. So the idea of justice for someone's death would have fallen on deaf ears.
I see.
It took some time for the counteroffer to come together. The negotiations made it all the way up to the Attorney General and Carter's Chief of Staff. But by 12:45 a.m. on March 11th, Cullinane called Caliph up. He was ready to make a deal. Cullinane told Caliph that as a condition for his full surrender, Caliph would be arrested by O'Brien and taken to the D.C. Superior Court that morning, where he would be arraigned and then released without bail. Without bail. That's crazy.
That is wild.
Then they agreed to give him a ride to his house so that he could pray, maybe wash up, and go back to sleep.
This is a very interesting deal.
Right? From there, the justice system would be left to play out. There likely isn't a world where Caliph does 0 jail time, But he probably felt as good as a clearly guilty person could about his defense, because during all of this, a very high-powered defense attorney called his wife, offering up his services should Caliph survive his crime.
Okay.
As Caliph weighed this proposal, O'Brien, sensing his hesitation, sweetened the pot just a little bit more. Quote, "I told you when I was up there, and I told you that my word was good. Now if you want me to come to court and say that I dealt with you in a very tense situation for a long time, that you always told the truth, and that you never lied to me. Anytime you ever told me you were going to do something, you did it, and I believe you to be an honorable man. I'll be happy to do that." He's offering to testify on his behalf.
Wow.
As like a character witness. Caliph replied and said, "That's nothing."
Okay, well, how about good luck?
Yeah, good luck, babe. This understandably got under Cullinane's skin. And for the first time in this whole situation, he actually lost his temper with Caliph.
Mm-hmm.
But he was able to simmer back down, and fortunately the talks still resumed.
Okay.
They agreed that Caliph's men would all be arrested, they would be arraigned, and the justice system would play out. They, being the police, were not willing to negotiate bail or bond for any of Caliph's men. Caliph, showing that he clearly only was in this to protect himself, agreed to the deal.
His co-conspirators are like, yo.
Yeah, like, we followed you into this, and now you're getting a ride home from court,
That's
and we're
crazy.
going to jail? Yeah. At 1 a.m., Caliph descended the elevator, was put in cuffs, and the hostage crisis that rocked Washington, D.C. officially came to an end. The mayor applauded, and took full credit for, the news, saying, quote, "The Lord was on our side. I didn't give up anything. What I got was 134 citizens alive."
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Classic politician.
Seems like he did a lot. And who was the mayor again?
Washington. First mayor of Washington, D.C.
Great. Who?
Washington.
Washington?
Mayor Washington.
Mayor. Wait, what was his first name?
Walter, I think?
Walter Washington. Okay, got it.
Let me make sure his first name's Walter. Yeah, Walter Washington.
Okay. The first mayor of D.C.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating.
Because home rule was established in 1973. So that's when D.C. was able to elect a mayor. And so he was the first one elected after home rule was established.
And his name is Washington.
Yep.
I love that.
It's perfect. About half an hour later, so around 1:30 a.m., the hostages began to be released. Their families, who had been waiting at the Foundry Methodist Church, embraced them in warm hugs, wet with tears of joy as church bells rang out in celebration. These 134 people made it out of one of the highest stakes negotiations in D.C. history alive. To quote American Caliph, "For some of the hostages, the moment marked the beginning of a new life. For many, though, the damage would be irreparable, appearing days, weeks, or even years later. Some would leave their spouses after their release, and some would marry fellow hostages. While some would start new jobs and new lives in faraway places, some would remain stuck in the moment, prisoner of their memories forever."
Sorry, but the idea of someone divorcing their spouse and then marrying a fellow hostage.
Yeah. That wedding
That's
website.
that's so tough. Imagine the person on the outside. I give up, man.
Yeah. And that wedding website would be insane.
Yeah.
We met at Benai Bread.
We met in a hostage situation.
It was so romantic.
Mazel tov.
I wish y'all the best.
Yeah.
While the hostages were reunited with their families and questioned by police, Caliph was busy at the D.C. Superior Court, where his arraignment was set for 5 a.m. He was charged with armed kidnapping and released without bail, on the conditions that he does not leave Washington, D.C., that he surrender his passport, not have any personal firearms, and not talk to any reporters. Pretty reasonable conditions, in my opinion.
Yeah. Agreed.
By 5:30 a.m., Caliph walked out of court a free man. He made it home before most of the hostages.
Wow. That's all I have to say. Wow.
And that's pretty much what the city was saying, too.
Yeah.
A lot would happen between Calip's arrest and the Hanafi Muslims' trials. First, the political fallout was immediate. Some, like President Carter, focused on the survivors, saying that this was, quote, vivid proof that a slow and careful approach was the effective way. Republicans had a different message. Quoting Senate Majority Leader Robert Byrd, who the notorious Byrd rule is named after, that is super relevant right now because of reconciliation, but I won't bore you to death. It was, quote, abhorrent in our society that individuals can commit these atrocious crimes and then be out on their own recognizance. Republicans felt like the deal negotiated was an utter breakdown of law and order and far too lenient. However, that is easy to say when you're not the one responsible for saving the lives of 134 people.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to think it is very lenient, but again, all the hostages were released, which is a lot of hostages. So let's also keep that in mind, right?
Yeah. And it's only lenient for a time.
Yeah.
Their only period of leniency was while he's waiting for trial.
Right. And granted, he could do something crazy during that time, though, which I think is the point, right? He's not supposed to, have weapons and all that, but that doesn't mean
absolutely.
he couldn't. So I see. But again, 134 people alive and well. I mean, not well, but alive. It's powerful.
Yeah, exactly. DC began its healing process by hosting a funeral for reporter Maurice Williams, who was killed in the district building, and 800 people, including the mayor and Iranian ambassador, were in attendance. Like I mentioned earlier, the other critically injured men, Marion Barry, Robert Pierce, and Cantrell, would survive, but not without their scars. Marion Barry had to battle PTSD following the crisis. Robert Pierce was paralyzed, and Cantrell faced something even darker. After surviving a bullet wound to the head, on his first day back at work at the district building where his attack occurred, he dropped to the ground and died.
What?
Yeah.
Was there an autopsy done? Do we know why? What?
I don't know why. I think stress and PTSD, probably.
Okay, yeah, why did they send him back to the district building on his first day of work?
But, sure, it could have been a heart attack or something like that. But...
Or brain bleed? I don't know, yeah, that's...
It's just hard to imagine that the siege had nothing to do with this, with his death.
Yeah, totally.
Because I can just imagine, thinking he's ready to go back to work, he walks in, he's overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And it's just too much for his healing body to take.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, poor Cantrell.
Yeah, that's really sad.
That's why in the first episode...
And his loved ones, too, that's really tough as well. Like, you survived a bullet to the head. That's heartbreaking.
So that's why in the first episode, I said that he was one of the casualties. Because
he did... Yeah, I gotcha.
It just kind of depends on how you look at it. But I also want to give him his, flowers for surviving. Because that's huge. And he made it back to work.
Yeah, what a fighter.
Against the advice of Mayor Washington, the film Caliph was trying to block reopened on March 14th.
Dang.
Where it just got, a ton of publicity and was now a way bigger film than it was before it started because of all of this.
Right. So, that's called backfiring.
Yeah. Exactly. And it played in full without incident on that day. While it seemed like DC was on its path towards healing, there was one group that wasn't going to let Caliph go without a fight. The Jewish Defense League, or JDL, a group that promoted a radical form of Jewish nationalism and believed in furthering their own beliefs through militant violence. Those tensions would reach a fever pitch when JDL hosted a rally outside of the Hanafi Center, armed with weapons and the proper permits, where they were probing Caliph and his men, trying to get a rise out of them and start a fight. But, to Caliph's credit, he and his men stood down and nothing came of this rally. Though, it was definitely because they didn't want to go to jail, and not because they were above engaging with the JDL.
Right, these are people who took over 100 people hostage.
Yeah, and they're out on... Yeah. Caliph's restraint had its limits, though. At his preliminary hearing, he would actually end up having his parole revoked and was sent to jail for various threats he made on recorded lines monitored by police, including, quote, death and destruction like this country never seen before.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah, agreed. Parole revoked.
Exactly. You can't be just throwing that around when you're on parole.
Should say that in general, but yeah, definitely not when you're on parole.
Yeah. This man really couldn't keep his temper in check for more than like a couple seconds.
Yeah. He's cooked.
The grand jury returned its indictment in May with a whopping 400 combined charges for the 12 men.
Sheesh.
Involved in the hostage crisis, including armed kidnapping, assault with intent to kill, murder, and much, much more. All of the men pleaded not guilty and were tried together in a trial that kicked off May 31st, 1977. The jury was composed of 8 women and 4 men, all black, but notably there were no Muslims in the box. The federal government's case hinged on being able to prove that this whole thing was planned and executed at the behest of one man, Caliph. If they could prove conspiracy, then everyone involved would be held responsible for the death of Maurice Williams, despite being in different places and committing different levels of violence. You'll kind of remember the only place where there was a ton of violence was the district building. The Muslim center, those hostages were basically unharmed. Mm-hmm. And then no one died at B'nai B'rith, but there were some people who were brutalized. So there were levels to the different hostage situations. Mm. This wasn't going to be an easy task for the prosecutors, though, particularly because there was evidence that Caliph was unaware of what was going on at the district building and expressed disapproval when he found out that the men had taken it too far. He basically hopped on the phone on a line that was being monitored and was like, what's going on at the district building? Who's there? Why was someone shot? Like, in the moment was like, what is going on? That shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a federal prosecutor, but I feel like this was a difficult way to prosecute it. But hey, again, I didn't go to law school.
Yeah. The defense's strategy was not to protest innocence, but rather put the American justice system on trial. If attorney Harry Alexander could prove that the American justice system had failed Caliph, and that he was acting in accordance with Allah's will, which he saw as the real law, like the law of Allah, mm-hmm. then maybe he'd be facing a lighter sentence. So the prosecution had a hard job, but the defense's job was way harder.
Yeah, these are some strategies.
Yeah. The trial lasted into July, with more than 100 witnesses called. But when it was the defense's turn to present their case, they only called one witness, Caliph.
Oh, good.
Caliph testified that there was actually no plan that day. This wasn't planned at all.
That's funny.
Yeah. Crazy how it just happened.
Curious.
They didn't go into this hostage situation with any form of leadership, plans, or goal. They were just following Allah's law, saying, quote, Allah is the plan. Caliph even testified that had he seen one of his men kill a hostage, he would have turned around and killed his man. I'm calling BS on that.
Yeah. And I just don't understand. I don't understand this in any way. Okay.
No. Like, how do you coordinate what I would say is a pretty successful hostage crisis?
You had 3 buildings.
And you got your film premiere stopped. You got some money out of it. You took the federal government to their knees, basically.
Yeah.
But there was no plan?
Yeah, silly. That's silly.
Remember, they had a truck full of weapons.
Yeah. No, that's silly.
Yeah. The defense rested its case following Caliph's testimony, with the defense attorney saying, quote, throughout history, men have made the mistake of adopting illegal means to gain an ultimate end. So he's basically saying that what he did was wrong, but he was doing it for a good cause.
Okay.
Yeah. Doesn't seem like a strong defense. But at first, the jury seemed poised to acquit. The first jury vote was 8-4 in favor of acquittal.
That's very frightening. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make me feel good. Please don't tell me he got away with this.
Well, after 3 days of deliberations, on July 23rd, 1977, the verdict was in. Guilty.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. Every man involved was facing up to 125 years in prison,
Wow.
with Caliph facing a whopping 325 years. But only 3 men, Caliph, Musakir, and Abdul Nuh, were found guilty of second-degree murder. So everyone wasn't held responsible for the death of Maurice Williams, just these 3 men.
Mm-hmm.
Caliph was sentenced to 41 to 123 years in prison. He would never be released, though, dying in the Federal Correctional Complex in North Carolina in 2003. Musakir received the strongest sentence, 78 years to life. The 3 brothers at the Islamic Center, where there wasn't really any violence that occurred, received the lightest sentence, but were still looking at 24 to 72 years in prison.
Mm.
The political implications of this tragedy were notable. President Carter issued a presidential security memo calling for a restructured federal anti-terrorism apparatus and a working group on terrorism that reported to the National Security Council. Hearings would be held and bills would be introduced, but the most notable political impact came in the form of a rising star in D.C. politics, councilman and survivor Marion Barry, who wasn't too many years away from a high-profile scandal of his own. And that is where I'm going to leave you for part 3. But don't worry, the episode is out right now.
Yay!